So we'll just go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. My name is Janelle Logan. I am the Executive Director and Curator here at Tefra ICA. And I'm really glad that you have joined us for our career panel. This is an ongoing series that we offer with the idea of supporting emerging professionals in the field, those who are interested in exploring what careers and opportunities exist in the arts. So with us tonight, there are three fantastic people who have had incredible careers and personal experiences that have actually led them to do the work that they're doing. Monica King joins us from Richmond. She is a curator, and I won't steal anybody's shine, but she's a curator, a gallerist, an amazing mind, and friend of artists. Ife Williams is a ceramicist, so a practicing artist and supporter of artists via her work as deputy director at Hambidge Center in Georgia, in the mountains of Georgia. And then Jonathan Schwartz, who is bi-locational by nature of the work between New York, Charlotte, and a couple of other places. But is the founder and director, co-director, CEO. We'll take all of it. You're in charge. Poobah. Yes, Grand Poobah of Atelier 4, which is a company that helps not only to move art from location to location, but also really partners with galleries, stores artwork, and is really thinking about how to work with artists on this kind of that portion of the work that we do and kind of neglect that movement and care of the arts. So with that, what we're going to do is to actually start in alphabetical order and have Monica start first with her introduction. And then Jonathan will go next, followed by Ife.
Okay. All right. Are we ready? Well, we are ready. Hello, everyone. Good evening. It is a pleasure to connect here with you virtually this evening. And I wanted to first thank all of you and applaud you for taking time out of your busy lives to hop on to this panel discussion, because I think it shows not only your passion for the arts, but your passion for expanding yourself. So good on you. And thank you for being here. In terms of giving you a glimpse into my kind of 20 plus-ish career in the arts, sounds like a long time. I tend to look back on what I've done in terms of the artists I've worked with, which is why when Jonelle asked for some images, I always feel like when I look back on what I've done, it really is the projects, exhibitions, installations, experiences I've been able to help artists achieve throughout the course of my career. So I'm showing you sort of just some of those. It's easier and more enjoyable than listening to me, watching me as I'm telling you this. I think it's a much more interesting visual exploration. The easiest way possibly to illustrate what I have done throughout my career is to tell you something kind of interesting. I realized this a while back. I have actually traversed the art world in the reverse order that most artists usually traverse the art world. And I find this amusing, and I'll tell you why I find it actually very formative for me. Normally, obviously, as a new artist, you start in an emerging gallery, looking to get exposure for your work, support for your projects. And then you move into more of a mid-career situation, which it's maybe the slightly bigger gallery with slightly more resources, more connections to help you spread spread your work around the globe a bit. And then, of course, now, granted, as I'm telling you this, I don't necessarily think that this is the ideal system. That's a different conversation, which we're not going to have tonight. I think it is the system we sort of work within. And then, so you get to this sort of unicorn level, which I'll call it, which is the blue chip gallery, where when an artist attains sort of that uh, place in their career, it's sort of a place where it's a gallery that's usually larger, perhaps has locations around the globe, can really help that artist in terms of expanding out their ideas, connecting to broader communities. The resources for the projects become more generous. So interestingly, since artists go that way, I actually, when I got out of my graduate studies in art history, I took an internship with Pace Gallery in New York, which is a blue chip gallery, one of the leading galleries internationally. And I ended up working for them for 10 years. The last 6 is their director of exhibitions. So it was very quickly, I had to acclimate to artists working sort of at the height of, projects that were anything they could imagine could really be done. They were working across the globe. We were working in museum exhibitions. We were working in gallery shows. So there was a huge learning curve, but it was fascinating. And I was also getting to work with artists who I had studied with or studied about in graduate school. I had done a paper on Fred Wilson, and suddenly here I am working alongside Fred Wilson on an exhibition. So it was really thrilling and an honor. Now, that being said, uh, I think the reason from there, I really wanted to get into understanding the artist side of it very directly. So I took a role helping a sculptor, Joel Shapiro, work on his initial archive project. He'd never really archived the complete nature of his career, and he was very advanced in his career at that point. And I would leave there and go to a mid-size, mid-career gallery. So now instead of working with a staff of 120, I was working with a staff of 30. I was leading a staff of 30. And I got a lot, I got to dig a lot more into the real day-to-day parts of a gallery, that when you're not with a bigger organization, you're really doing these things. So that was really instrumental, I think, in my development. And then, oddly enough, I ended up going to a startup gallery, an emerging space, and being their inaugural director. And then later, I went on to start my own emerging space. So now I'm kind of on the ground, starting from the ground up. And so, really, I've kind of gone all the way down the hill in the reverse direction that an artist would go. And I tell you this, and I find it interesting because I realized, I think, when I opened my own space, that the biggest lesson that I have learned sort of throughout my career in the art world, and it's something I wanted to share with you because I think it's important, is that in all of this, regardless of where an artist is in this path, in this journey, and the structure that's kind of been created that they sort of have to exist within, regardless of where they're at, there's really 3 sort of elemental tenets that we're all trying to do when we say we work in the arts. And those 3 things for me are: number 1, giving an artist the ability to create the work that they want to create. Number 2, the ability to show that work to the broadest audience possible. And by that, I mean community, I mean critical audience, and I also mean obviously collectors, all of the above. And then third, I think this general notion of stability, because an artist's career is supposed to last from the moment that they first start doing work until their last breath, because they don't really retire. So giving them this stability to continue evolving, changing, and developing, and I do mean financial stability, but also support stability. So by remembering that I was supporting artists in this elemental way, regardless of where I found myself in my career in the art world, it always relocated me to why I had gotten into it in the first place. And it reminded me what we're all here for. And so for me, that was always a good way to focus on kind of what really was most important in an often chaotic, sort of very vastly, quickly changing art world. And I'm telling you this today because as you all are either starting or continuing on your paths in the art world, I hope that you'll always find something like that that really reconnects you to why you first wanted to work in the art world, and to the real reality that we're all in this to help the artists along their journeys. And so that's kind of all I really wanted to say. I could go into much greater detail about what I've done, but I don't want to bore you with that or take up all of our time. So I'm going to leave it there. And if there's any specific questions, I will say what all of this has led me to now. One of the things I focus on a lot now is helping artists with professional development. And when I kind of revealed to them this idea that, look, no matter where you're at on this journey, you're really going to be thinking about the same things, just maybe in a different vein. Like if you're really successful, you still are wondering, is that next body of work going to be well received? Is my dealer going to want me to do that next body of work? Or are they going to be hung up on the one I did before that was so popular? Whereas when you're emerging, it's more, hey, I want to do this project. I need money. So, but it's still the same concern. I want to do this body of work. How's it going to go? So again, I'll leave you with that as a general what I've learned in the art world sort of thing. And I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleagues who have had incredible journeys of their own.
Thank you. So Jonathan, would you like to share with us, please?
Sure, I'll give you a little bit of a background on my specific journey, and then you can roll that great little explainer video, which kind of sums up everything it is that we do. We shouldn't roll.
Are all objects born
I guess
equal?
we are. Here it goes. No. Go for it. Run it.
No, they're not. But after they're packed and crated, they all look the same. No matter the contents, we're here to care for your property. One thing all our projects have in common is that they deal in volume, weight, and distance. Are you working in inches or centimeters, pounds or kilograms? What are the dimensions of your package? Do we need special equipment to handle your package? If you need our expert technicians to pack your object, give us a description of the material, artist medium, or any specific instructions you may have. Artworks aren't meant to travel. They're made to hang on walls or sit on pedestals. But if you have to move it, the safest way is direct, and that might cost you, so please let us know your budget. In order for us to give you options, let us know of any access issues. Can only small trucks enter your street, or is your location a 5-story walk-up? Is your shipment crossing international borders? Is it a temporary exhibition that will travel to another location, or is it a permanent export for sale? If your object contains anything that requires a U.S. Fish and Wildlife certificate or its international equivalent, we need to know if it's on a restricted or endangered list.
Hey, you want my smell of the dust?
We also offer a variety of security services such as supervision at airports, courier assistance for high-value and museum exhibitions, or maybe you just need your object stored in a climate-controlled warehouse. Whatever the reason is for coming here, we're glad you came, and view our relationship as a partnership to protect our cultural legacy.
Well, I've got nothing left to say. No, I'm just kidding. So that's a pretty good description of most of what me and my 100 employees do every day in our locations in New York, Miami, Charlotte, and Los Angeles. But what really makes me feel good about what I do is that we're part of the art ecosystem that's responsible for transporting what I like to call education. Because, you know, in the world of STEM, meaning science, technology, engineering, and math, there was a gap there, and it was the arts. And the arts are really special. Art and food are maybe like the only things that people from diametrically opposed political ideologies could actually agree on. You either love it or you don't. And Bill Gates's idea, that's Microsoft Bill Gates, years ago, of digitizing all artwork to make it fully democratized was very wrong-headed, because if you've ever seen artwork on a tablet or on your iPhone or on an Instagram, and then you see the work in person, you'll realize that these are two completely different experiences. I mean, there are some relatively flat works or illustrative works that might convey themselves well, but without being in the room with it, you're not connecting your heart with your mind, which is what art can do. And not just visual arts, but of course poetry, dance, all of it. And companies like us make it possible for people to see works of art that are made in one part of the hemisphere to another part of the hemisphere without it breaking. So that's what kind of validates what I've done. And to tell you about how this all started, once upon a time, I thought I wanted to be an artist. I was also a musician. I had a band and we were playing in New York City every week, and I had a studio and I was making art. But of course, I needed a living. And a friend of mine who was working at the Brooklyn Museum saw an ad in the New York Foundation of Arts for a company looking for a driver to go from New York to LA, delivering art to galleries, to homes, to museums. And so I took this job, 1986, and I completely faked it. I did not have the experience to drive this big truck. And it's kind of insane. On this journey, I learned everything that you probably shouldn't be doing. And then years later, when some New York galleries encouraged me to start my own company, I took a lot of those lessons to create something that would be sustainable for other people, because I loved being on the road and meeting new people, meeting artists, meeting art collectors, listening to the reasons why they're so passionate about it. It was a great gig, and it still is. I have to say that whatever you do, as long as you're not jaded, you're alive and you've probably made the right choice. On this journey, I started with mostly working with contemporary art galleries, but my interest was always to do things bigger and better. And slowly, when I started my company, I started with one partner, and then I had a second person and a third person, and then I realized that we had to structure things. Of course, I'd had absolutely no education in business whatsoever. So for the first 10 years, we had this really great reputation, but I was struggling making payroll. So I called in an older sister of mine who taught me something about cost accounting. Now, this probably sounds very foreign to a lot of people, but I encourage any artist to learn about cost accounting, because what it does is it shows you how you can put on a ledger or a spreadsheet everything that impacts your life in terms of how much money flies out of your bank account. And that way you can kind of figure out what you should be charging for your artwork in order to not only just break even, but to have a little nest egg that you can develop. And it could be possible for some artists to maybe have a side hustle and follow these precepts of cost accounting and actually, retire with a little bit of ease. And if you make it big with one of those blue chip galleries, of course, that's a whole other story. And on my journey from going to working from primarily galleries, contemporary art galleries, to working with museums, I really started to think about travel, and I wanted to take it overseas. And to me, the most incredible reward would have been something that happens every 2 years in Venice, Italy. It's the Biennale. It's like the World's Fair of art. And funny enough, the first gig I ever got was with an artist that I think Monica King was associated with, because I saw it on the slides. It was Fred Wilson for the US Pavilion in 2003. And we scored that job. And I've been working in Venice, not only for the Art Biennale, but on the off years, they have an Architectural Biennale. And I try to give opportunities to my staff, many of whom are artists, but not all of them are artists. As a matter of fact, just to let you people know, you artists out there, I was once told by an art teacher of mine, Richard Bosman, said, if you need a job to support yourself, maybe it shouldn't be in the art world, because you want to remain as pure as possible. That's just an opinion, but I think it's something interesting to think about. A lot of my employees, by the way, have come from non-art backgrounds, because there's two schools of thought. You either take people who have art sensibilities and then teach them a more structured way of coming to the job, teaching them maybe a work ethic, which they may or may not have. And then on the other side, there are tradespeople, hardworking people out there who don't have the art education, but some of them might take to the art sensitivity. And I have to say, in terms of populating an art handling company, it's that second category that is very enduring, because one issue with being an artist and working as an art handler is that if your career hasn't taken off, you might not have a lot of compassion for the work of others that you're handling. Another thing to think about. Anyway, the explainer video shows you pretty much what I do. It's pretty involved. There are other services that we offer. You heard a little bit about my story, and I'd like to let Ife tell you her story, and then we can open this up for Q&A. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ife Williams. I am the Deputy Director at the Hambidge Center, which is located in North Georgia. I often say we might as well be in North Carolina because we're closer to things in North Carolina than anything in Georgia, other than trees. But so I started out, I knew I wanted to be an artist from forever. And my mother, I was fortunate to have a mother who had a BFA in printmaking. So my mother understood what I wanted to do, but also, as you're a teenager and you're asking for things to do, she would say, no, you're gonna just have to suffer. It'll give you more to do to put into your art. Like, no, you can't do that, but you'll be okay. It'll turn into good art. So I went to my last 2 years of high school at Interlochen Arts Academy, and that's where I was introduced to stone carving and metalsmithing, which is what I ended up getting a BFA in at University of Michigan. And then I realized that making art is a lonely thing. Like, I'm alone when I do it. And so I decided to go into more of the community building and pulling creativity out of the people around me versus fully committing to depending completely on my artwork to make money. So I went back to school to do museum studies at Syracuse. And I realized that, well, I also had realized that museums show work differently than we're taught to make it. And I wanted to fix that. So I was going to do exhibition design. I never did. I ended up working in collections for like doing storage and telling curators they can't touch things, which was one of my favorite things to do. And then I went into public art. So I was making things that were intended to be touched, or contracting other artists to make things that were intended to be touched. And I have been in Georgia, started doing public art in Georgia for about 20 years. And in 10 years ago, I started doing ceramics. I moved from stone carving to ceramics and did a residency at Hambidge. I already was familiar with them because they were within the organizations that the job I had funded. So I knew Hambidge, and 4 years ago, I started working here, and I actually live in the middle of 600 acres at the residency campus, and I get to deal with 175 artists a year, 8 at a time, and they come to campus for 2 to 6 weeks from mid-February to mid-December. The pictures that are going by show some of the people on campus and on our trail, some of our facilities. I think I threw one picture of my artwork in there, but everything else is more what I get to do throughout my year. And yeah, I still make art. I try to build it into a routine so that I don't get lost in the paperwork and supporting everybody else. But it does get challenging to remember to go and do my practice while I'm working with everybody else. But I think that answers all of the who, what, when, where, how questions.
So Ife, can you explain, just to make sure that everyone has the same kind of understanding, can you talk a little bit about a residency, how artists get into them, what they are, and
Sure.
maybe something that makes yours stand out?
Um, yes, and I have like a whole script of what I was supposed to say, and one of the things was that our residency applications for fall of 2025 open on Saturday, and the deadline is April 15th. It's in slide room. It's pretty simple though when I filled it out and I was, coming from a administrative background versus talking about my art all the time. It was one of the hardest things I felt like I'd ever done. But it's really easy. It's just 10 images or 10 files. Um, but so Hambridge is unique in that we don't require you to go hang out with the community. You don't even have to hang out with each other. You come, you have your own space, you have a workspace, a kitchen, a sleep space. 8 different people are on campus at a time. We do ask you to spend dinner together 4 times a week. Other than that, people are not supposed to go knock on anybody's door without being invited. We're in the middle of um, the beginning of the Appalachians, so we're mountains, and we have musicians, visual artists, ceramicists, a couple of scientists, maybe writers. So we have usually one of each, a couple of writers maybe at the same time. So part of the conversation that happens at dinner is that you're talking through what you're working on, but you're also
Jonathan Schwartz.
getting the opportunity to experiment with things and not worry about whatever you came to do working out, unless of course you have a deadline that you're trying to meet. Um, a lot of our residency is rural and remote. You don't have Wi-Fi, so you're like away from your laundry and your kids and your city and whatever it is you do every day, and you can really focus. But there are other residencies that are in a city that you may not live where you're working. So an urban residency may just give you workspace, and it also gives you, once you're out of school, you lose that community of artists who give you feedback, solicited or otherwise. And so when you're there at Hambridge or another residency, a lot of times you'll have people who will come in and talk about your work with you, give you some of that feedback that you don't get when you're just working in your studio alone. Um, and there are different residencies. There are some that are all women. There are some that are all one discipline of artwork. There are some that expect you to leave something behind. There are some that are you alone on an island in a body of water in Maine for, 6 months or something. So there's a huge range. Most have an application and a review process. Some are invitational, some have cost that you have to cover. Yeah. I can go on and on and on.
No, thank you, because I think that helps people kind of understand, like when you're talking about being in the woods, like, why are you in the woods? And like, who's there with you, and the idea of a residency. So thank you for that.
So I
Um,
have met people who actually, when they graduated from college, decided they were going to go from residency to residency for the whole year and not have rent and just go and have, sometimes you get studio space that you don't have equipment anymore once you're out there, and you get to use that stuff too.
that's great. Thank you. So I have questions, but first I want to open up the floor a little bit to see if anyone who is on the call would like to ask some questions. And for those of you that joined us later, any question is totally open and relevant. Ask what you'd like to know. And you can either come off mute or raise your hand.
Yeah, my name is Nia Grimes, and I have a couple questions. So my first question is for Monica, and I wanted to know, what is the biggest challenge that you faced with the creation of your own company?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. It's funny. I hardly I don't even like to refer to them as challenges in that case, because I think I sort of saw it as opportunities, because from the beginning, I wanted to do it very differently. Coming from a world of kind of how I'd seen galleries done for a long time, I wanted it to be very community focused, very welcoming, very cozy. When people came in, if they wanted to say hello to me, I was there to say hi. I wasn't hiding in an office. I wanted everyone to feel welcome. I encouraged friends who were teachers in educational spaces in the city to bring their students. I wanted it to really be a gallery, but also to take away some of that stigma of galleries can sometimes feel kind of serious. And I had come from a very small town in North Carolina. I'm from Mount Airy, North Carolina. And when I first got to the New York art world, there were times it was like, do I belong here? And I didn't want anyone to walk into my space and feel that way. So a lot of it was sort of trying to reacclimate the way people would think, because when I was opening, people would say things like, well, what kind of work are you showing? And I was like, I'm working with artists from all over. I'm open. I'm working with photographers from Mexico and artists from painters from the South and artists from down the street in Brooklyn. And everyone kept trying to sort of put me in a box, like, well, are you doing this? And I kept trying to sort of rewrite what that box was supposed to look like. And it did. Some people didn't love that. I would get sort of like, you're doing what? So I think if anything, being different was something that was a good challenge.
Thank you.
I hope that if you have a follow-up, please, if I didn't address that in the way you might have thought, I'm happy. And then of course there's always the challenge of just keeping it going, because you're constantly trying to do these projects and find ways to fund these projects and keep your costs down. And that's a constant challenge. It almost goes unspoken because it's obvious. But so I tried to focus on the things that actually felt like they could move the needle and make some change in the art world. And it made those other little detail challenges less annoying, I think. So, but that's an excellent question. So
Yeah, thank you. My next question, if no one else has a question, is for Jonathan. I wanted to know, how or what legal policies do you find your company and yourself interacting with the most?
Oh, yeah. Let me get my legal consultant on board. Uh, okay, so I think probably the most difficult legal stuff that we have to deal with, because we usually don't deal with legal issues, we deal with things like insurance, would be when we transport objects internationally. There are seizure laws about and money laundering laws that we have to deal with all the time. And you can avoid most of them by having your documents vetted correctly and do your best to work with reputable people. To get an idea of what I'm talking about, for people outside of the art world, the closest thing there is to the art business is the real estate business, because these are both tangible assets, meaning that they are physical objects with value. The difference between these two businesses is that the real estate business is regulated and the art business is not regulated. So you have to be really careful who you work with. So I'd say amongst the legal issues that we have, it's probably with who the other parties were transacting with.
Thank you. And then my last question is for Ife. Did I say that correctly? Okay, perfect. Great. You briefly mentioned how you did a museum studies program or thought about doing a museum studies program at Syracuse. A little bit of background to me, I am currently a senior at William and Mary, and I have been applying to museum studies programs. So I just kind of wanted to get your insight and hear a little bit more about that.
So when I went to museum studies for a master's in museum studies at Syracuse, it was a long time ago. And there were not as many museum studies programs as there are now. It was in the late 90s. And I went to Syracuse because they had a hands-on element where you actually were the graduate students for the museum studies program were running the gallery. And we would do installation, we would do the registrar, the condition reporting, the design of the exhibitions, um and also the preparator work. We would paint the gallery, hang the gallery. We got all of that
Yes.
experience. We had to ship things to ourselves to prove that we could ship a brick and an egg without breaking it. Um, so I went because I wanted the hands-on experience, and I was able to finish all the coursework in a single year, so I didn't have to stay there for a long time. But that's why I picked it. It wasn't heavy on, a lot of paperwork and reading but we did do all the pieces of work that goes into a museum, from writing grants to making labels and all that stuff.
Thank you. Thank you all for answering my questions. Sorry, so many.
Do not apologize, please. Um, are are there other questions that someone would like to ask in this moment? Okay, so I have a question. Monica, you said something about the idea of doing it differently. And I feel like each of you has done it differently. Can you talk a little bit for someone who is, we're in this moment where things are rapidly shifting. We have people who are starting their careers and really trying to figure out what they want to do, or are in a program and looking at, well, what I want my program to look like, or how do I get the education that I desire? Can y'all talk about some of the benefits and the fears that you each had in doing it different?
Yeah, I mean,
And what made you stay with it, right?
yeah.
Despite your reservations.
Yeah, I think that's it's an excellent point. I think whenever you're doing something, when you're in kind of, and here I was in the middle of the New York art world where it's always kind of felt one way. And I have my Southern accent to begin with, so I'm already quite suspect. And, and suddenly I'm, offering, people a cup of tea when they come in and do you want to chat about art? And they're looking at me like, what? Like we actually had people sort of like, what are you doing? And, for me, I always think whenever you're creating something, if you know what you want to create, it's just sort of defining what those things are. And for me, it was voices that weren't being heard, because I'd also come up in an art world where I knew there were so many people's voices who weren't being heard. So that was a central tenet. And then also this idea of welcoming, I think coming from outside, I not having grown up in a world that was, parallel to the art world. I didn't come from, a family that was involved in any way. And I just, that kind of wanting people to feel that it's a place that's welcoming. So if I focused on those two things, for me, I think it's almost like with brand strategy. If you say, this is what I'm going to be, and in everything I do, I'm going to make sure those things are present. And so that's kind of how I did it, because I feel like if you go in and you say, oh, I'm going to do this differently, and then your actions in different ways don't line up to that in everything you're doing, people are going to then they'll kind of push back. But everything I was doing sort of fit that, being artist centric, I was showing artists who from all over. I was showing artists who hadn't been shown in New York, and and we were letting people have events, universities and schools have events in the space for no charge, and everything we were doing was kind of on that brand. And I think that's where, when you're trying to make change, just that you need that consistency. And then you also keep believing it yourself, because if it's in everything you're doing, you're not going to get so scared, because you're like, this is what I'm doing and I'm all in, you know? But I hope that helps answer a little bit.
I could say that in saying what was one of the questions was why did you not give up, or why did you not try to turn out doing it the regular way kind of thing? And until you asked that question, I don't think I thought very much about doing it any other way than the way that I did it. Like, it wasn't like, here's a choice and I'm gonna go the different way. It was just the way that unfolded in front of me. And I think that it has a lot to do with the fact that I've always tried to help people recognize the creativity that they have, because I think that to a lot of people, creativity is not considered. It's like, doodling is when you're not paying attention, or, it was an escape thing for people. But in my family, it was always encouraged. And so I think that I just continued doing that. And so talking to people about, if you don't think you're creative, what do you don't sing in the shower, or you don't cook, everyone has something. And I think that that sort of drove me down the path that I went down.
What about you, Jonathan? Truck driving, a musician?
Yeah. Okay. So, when I started, it was on the job training all the way through. There was no education for this at the time. I mean, I had a bachelor's degree in anthropology. I did some studio arts. I loved history. So I had the art sensitivity, but I had to learn how to drive a truck. I had to learn how to pack the artwork, install the artwork, build crates. Then I had to learn how to manage people. I had to learn accounting. I had to learn all of the things, all of the elements, all of the jobs that I finally hired to help support the company. We're now at a little over 100 employees. And the one thing that I decided that I didn't want to do was to go into what is considered the more sophisticated contemporary form of business, which is brokerage, where I'm doing the arrangements, but I hire other companies to do the heavy lifting. I felt like the idiosyncrasies of artists and their materials are really needing a single point of contact, a small group of people that understand the nature of the work, understand the idiosyncrasies of the art collectors, understand the needs of the curators and the registrars and the conservators. And so I decided that we would not outsource those things. We would have our own fleet of trucks. We would have our own art handlers, our own carpenters, our own customs brokers, our own freight forwarders. And it's an old model, and it might not be the one that brings us the greatest profit, but I think it brings us the greatest success in terms of client satisfaction. There you have it.
Thank you. Okay, so would anyone else like to ask a question? Okay, so we will kind of wrap up with a thing. So this is an opportunity. You all have been combined in the field for a very long time. So what is this? Like, everyone has at least a decade of experience. And I'm just going to say a decade, right? What is the one thing that you think people need to consider as they're either pursuing their career in the arts or looking at shifting how they're working in the field?
You
I
mean
would.
like, sorry, go ahead, Ife.
You go. No.
We're talking about from the perspective of a creator, of an artist.
You want to approach it as a creator and an artist, because all of you in various ways are creatives and creators. All of you have this like long-standing history. what is the one thing
Okay.
that you think folks should consider?
Okay. So, like Ife mentioned earlier, that studio life could be a lonely life. So she decided to do things a little differently. I know a young man here in New York City named Onyeka Kachuk, who was a graduate of Cooper Union, an art school that used to be free, by the way, 100% free. That just changed a couple of years ago. And he's an excellent artist, but he's also a very social animal. And he decided to pivot somewhere down the line. And now he's got a gallery called Storage. He's not in the storage business. That's my business, but he is an excellent dealer, but he's also a great artist. But he's decided this choice. So it's important, like Ife, to know what makes you tick and know where you'll be happiest. Like, for instance, you might have a vision of what you thought it was that you wanted to do. But that vision, if you stick to it so stubbornly, might not be the answer to your happiness. And you can't be happy all the time. My father used to say, if you're happy all the time, you've got to be an idiot. Because, life is a never-ending string of ups and downs, punctuated by brief moments of joy. And those moments of joy, that's up to you to find out how to have that. And while you're doing this, remember, as an artist specifically, it's almost like everything you do is autobiography. You're constantly expressing yourself through your lens, which means that uh, the other needs of people might not be a priority for you. So be sensitive while you're creating this work. Every so often, look up from your easel, look up from the potter's wheel, take a look at what's going on, get a little water cooler time, and just remember that you are in control of your happiness. I hope that helps.
Ife?
Now I have to remember what I was going to say before he said that. Um,
Sorry.
give me the question again.
So one thing that you think that people should part with, right, as
Oh,
artists, as creatives, as looking at new opportunities.
so I think that one thing as an artist that I find is that I undervalue myself and my time. And even as an arts administrator, if someone asks me for a rate, I might talk myself out of giving them that rate. Um, and so I think that if, you should always ask for what you think, what your real price is, what you think it's worth. Think about what went into it and all of that. And if you think, say, they're not going to be able to afford it and I'm willing to give it to them for this, you can still start out saying this is what the value is. And we can talk about, payment plans and trade and whatever you're willing to do, but don't start out with your low price. Don't go crazy, but don't undervalue yourself. And if someone's really interested, they will talk to you about it and let them know if you're open to negotiate or if you're not. So. And as you're starting out, don't undervalue your experience either, because like if you're applying for a residency application and it asks you what are your 5 greatest accomplishments, right? Don't start out explaining how you don't know, you haven't done much. Like just present what you have. You are where you are, and it's your creativity and your work that's gonna be received. And if you're just someone started somewhere, right? So we take people at all stages of their career, and it's just important not to start out making excuses for where you are when there's no need to do that.
Hey, Monica.
I think I would lead with the word flexibility, because I think the art world is such a constantly shape-shifting beast that, I remember when I first got into the art world, like art fairs were not really a thing. There was like Basel, Switzerland, and then suddenly, 5 years in, it's the thing. So I think and so if you had been in there, that wasn't even a role that really existed. I mean, it exploded, like suddenly they're everywhere. So I think being flexible and knowing that you're always going to be learning and shifting and, and even if you're doing something that seems like it's a path, it's the art world, because it's a creative industry, it never really stays in one form. And I think that's a good thing, because it's why we all as creatives can constantly be challenged, and it makes us be creative. So I think go in knowing that there's a lot of times you may, I could be 10 years into my career and suddenly things happen and I have to learn a whole new thing and I don't know anything. And you're like, what is this thing? And being okay with that, and not, and knowing that, you're never going to know everything. Your knowledge is never going to be, every day things shift, that you have to learn new ways of seeing and new ways of thinking. And I sort of equate it to being like an artist, kind of see yourself as you are in trying to help, the careers of artists. You yourself are sort of like an artist and you're constantly evolving. So be flexible, and, and I think that also involves when you're looking for your role in the art world. Like you may think like, this is it, this is it. But if something else comes along, like look at it, and you may, give it a chance, because you may be surprised, It may be another route to where you want to go that you didn't think of. So
Thank you for that. So this is our last call for questions. If you have one, go ahead and take yourself off of mute and ask. Russ, please. Oh, wait, Russ, you're muted. Hold on. There we
I was
go.
a little out of the demographic for this session, so I wanted to make sure that everybody else got their questions answered before I came in. But in terms of what you were just talking about, with needing to shift based on the circumstances and the fact that the art world is changing so much, I mean, especially in terms of the kinds of digital opportunities, I find myself having a lot of questions. So like if I'm, reviewing and trying to decide whether or not to enter an open call, and one of the things that it says is, that this is a digital opening, this is going to be a digital exhibition. I have like questions about that, and whether or not that's something that's going to be worth my time, or whether that's somebody who is like looking to actually make a profit off of artist fees, entry fees, things like that. Do you guys have any tips for how to qualify an open call in terms of whether or not it's worth your time or something to steer away from?
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to know, are you talking about a like the exhibition that you're trying to join is a digital exhibition, a virtual exhibition?
Yeah, or it's like some of the calls that are on Cafe are like for digital only exhibitions, or they're for inclusion in a publication or things like that, as opposed to, in person. I'm really only interested in that in-person experience.
Yeah,
phenomenological experience of the work.
So we're talking about analog versus digital, and I have a feeling that I believe that there is definitely a place for technology and digitization in conceiving of a work. But I think ultimately, if it's not an analog experience, we're talking about something completely different. And I think we've all seen what happened with NFTs. I think we could pretty much rest assured that that is just a means to create collectibles like baseball cards and comic books. I think in terms of the analog experience, I think that there hopefully will never be a replacement for that. And if there is, like humans, we'll adapt to it. But I'll be out of a job, I can tell you that.
Right. So, I mean, so the problem I'm trying to solve for myself is one of exposure, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to get the work to be seen by people who might be interested in or match the work. And there are all kinds of opportunities that present themselves that say this is going to be great for exposure. And I just find myself sometimes having difficulty making the decision about whether it's worth applying for a particular show or not.
I mean, it's just my opinion, but I believe that if ultimately the viewer is not going to have an in-person analog experience with your work, they're not going to really know your work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might add on top of that because I have this discussion a lot with a lot of the artists I work with now, because I think everyone is really it's that step of trying to get, you have your studio, you're making your work. How do I get it out and share it with the community, with the critics, with the world? And I think so much of it is in that case, think of it as you'd probably be better to put that energy toward actually going out and connecting with like real people and I always tell people it's not even connecting just with like the gallerists. Connect with, like, say, I always say locate a few programs you really really look up to and you feel like your work would be a good fit, and then try to get to know the artists who are in that program, and I think just your network, it's like anything else in life. As you build that network, things will start to grow from it, because I think what you give attention to grows. So if you're just putting, doing open calls that are kind of digital, and it's, yeah, the work's out there, but I think you'll get a lot more excitement from actually really connecting
Mhm.
with places where you could show the work in its physical form. And I always encourage artists to have like a day, maybe it's not every week, but every couple of weeks, where you literally spend some time going, okay, who am I connecting with? How am I getting myself out there? Because if you're just existing in your studio and making work, part of it is also sort of making those connections. So have a day where you go, okay, who are some galleries I am interested in? You should always have like a list of a few that you actually would really like to maybe work with. And then you can kind of start to, go to their events if they're local to you, or when you're in New York, make a point of stopping by, and just try to focus your efforts, because it's always, if you don't know what you want, you're never going to move towards it. So spend a day, even if it seems silly and you're like, well, that gallery's never going to show me. You don't know, but you have to envision it as a possibility first. And so if I were you, rather than, I think I certainly agree, rather than playing too much in just the digital world, I would try to get out into the real world of people, because most artists I know, a lot of their opportunities came through their human artist network.
So one last question, and it related to that. So one of the things I've been thinking about is the possibility of like approaching a commercial landlord who has like an empty storefront about the possibility of doing like a pop-up show. Uh, have any of you had any kind of experience with that? And if so, what are some things that I might need to think about that I might not know I need to think about?
I would say that when I was doing public art, we would sometimes approach landlords to get permission to put artwork in on behalf of other artists instead of just having gallery shows. And one of the things, if you're doing your own pop-up, is thinking about how people will get there. If you will need to be there physically, how it will be manned? Will it be in the windows, or will it actually be a open and active space? And what that schedule will look like? Um, and how you'll communicate that information. If it'll just be on the site, if it'll be digitally. Um, but being there and getting the word out, especially if it's not something, if it's only going to be a month or however long, um, it's not a place that people are already coming to see what you're bringing. So you're gonna have to get that information out. That
Right.
is and on the question about the digital exhibitions, I would say if you're responding to open calls, it's helpful to say, usually there's a juror or some person that they put out there as their advertisement for sort of endorsing that they're real. If you stick to people whose work you know, people whose work you respect, people who you already you have some level of respect for what they're willing to put their name on, that'll help you weed out the ones that may or may not be real. Um, that's a start.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Monica, Ife, and Jonathan, thank you for joining us this evening, sharing your experience and your wisdom and all of it. We really appreciate it. And it really is what we're hoping to do, is to continue to be a resource for these kinds of conversations. So if you join us again, please, 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 one, let us know some of the things that you might be interested in learning about or hearing about. But then also truly feel free to ask questions and engage with our panels as we go along, because we really want to make sure that everyone is kind of getting something out of the experience. So thank you again to everyone here. I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, and you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.